Welcome back. We finally conclude that first portion of the war, and we now turn to the intervening Peace of Nicias that turned out to be really only an interval in the fighting and not, unfortunately, a complete cessation of hostilities as might have been originally imagined. What you should understand as you follow through these events of the war is that the ups and downs of fortunes in the war reflect what really can happen in mythology and tragedy, as Athenians especially were able to put into expression with their stage drama. That as particular events occur to change the fortunes of one city versus another city, wartime being an especially likely occurrence for that type of thing to happen, that tragedy can result. So one should realize in the changing fortunes of the war that all of this is the kind of lifestyle that the Greeks in general have to be used to, and which the Athenians in general can observe and make use of as they compose tragedies. So as you're looking over the tragedies of Euripides, you should realize that the kind of desperation that's likely to have taken hold of the Athenians in this period, when they have been fighting this really long war and they've lost their great leader Pericles, they are suffering financial despair, they're emotionally distraught, they've lost quite a few people out in combat. The Spartans have beaten them. The Thebans have beaten them on some occasions. They've also had some great victories, but those of them that have also come at their own costs. All of this is eating away gradually at the Greek psyche through this period. And it's in this period, therefore, that you can hopefully appreciate more now that you're reviewing these historical events, that tragedy is going to become a ripe medium to express a lot of these very unhappy thoughts. Mythology also, with the Greeks, does quite a bit of lesson teaching. Mythology is very blunt with the Greeks. It's not a pretty, sweet subject. And the tragedy itself reflects a lot of what goes on in real life, but especially what's reflected in real life in the myths. So Greek myth and tragedy really are partners in crime, as it were, expressing for the Greeks what's really a very bleak outlook on life. And so understand, again, as you follow what's going on with the war, that all of this is the type of thing that can fuel the Athenians' need for exposition of all of this unhappiness in a particular art form, as tragedy turns out to be. Let's now talk about the Peace of Nicias. This was brokered by the general Nicias, and it lasted, as it turned out, for 7 years, from 421 to 414 BC. The intent of it was basically to restore the Athenians and the Spartans essentially to the conditions that they had held before the war started, as much as possible. So the Athenians and the Spartans were once again basically given back all of the allies and possessions that they had previously. Essentially, this is a carbon copy of the first Peloponnesian War and its 30 years peace. Once again, terms are laid down that allies from one side are not to bother allies from the other side, as before. But now we have some new problems, of course, with this particular war based on possessions that have fallen onto the other side. So the Athenians have two major possessions that they've lost: Amphipolis and Panactum. The Spartans have two things the Athenians are holding on to: these prisoners from Pylos and the island of Cythera. So essentially, the terms have the intent of restoring those lost items back to the Athenians and the Spartans. So again, it's an effort to essentially put everything to amends back to the way that it was before. If this sounds a little bit like Humpty Dumpty, falling off the wall, breaking up, and not being able to be put back together again, as it turns out, this is exactly what this is effectively. It will not work out nearly as well as anyone had hoped. The tripping stone actually turns out to be the city of Amphipolis, as we'll now explain. When the peace was concluded, there was a meeting point for the Athenians and the Spartans to begin carrying out the terms of the peace. A lot was taken as to who was going to have to deliver the first term. The Spartans ended up getting the lot to deliver the first term, so the Athenians were allowed to specify what term that would be. Of course, the Athenians immediately said Amphipolis, so the Spartans agreed. They went up to Amphipolis and declared that the city needed to be returned to ownership under the Athenians and membership in the Delian League. The Amphipolitans refused, and the Spartans suddenly had a major problem on their hands. So when the Spartans reported this trouble back to the Athenians at first thought the Spartans were responsible for bad faith. In response to that, the Spartans offered an alliance between the Athenians and themselves in order to strengthen the new bond that the two sides had. So, in fact, an alliance was concluded between the Spartans and the Athenians, a rather surprising move on all sides. But there it was. Okay, now, once the alliance was concluded, they came back to the bargaining table regarding the terms, and the Athenians decided to let the Spartans temporarily off the hook for Amphipolis and to deal with the other terms and to deal with Amphipolis afterwards. Okay, the Spartans agreed. The Athenians now said to the Spartans, "We want Panactum back." And the Spartans now stepped up their side and said, "If we're going to give you Panactum back, we want the prisoners in Kythera back." They shook hands. The Athenians now did return the prisoners back and did return Kythera back, and the Spartans contacted the Thebans and ordered them to turn Panactum back over to the Athenians. The Thebans agreed. The Athenians went up to take Panactum back again. When they arrived, they discovered, I think you can see this coming, Panactum had been destroyed. The Thebans had destroyed it after they seized it from the Athenians after the Battle of Delium, and the Athenians were apoplectic. Of course, the Thebans could simply say, "We gave you Panactum back." So, this failed. The result was that now the Athenians outright did continue to accuse the Spartans of bad faith, now having carried out both of their sides of the peace and having nothing back in return, neither Amphipolis nor Panactum. And so that now induced the Athenians to turn to other means to satisfy their grievances. It happened that there were other cities waiting out there also with grievances against the Spartans, and so the Athenians found for themselves a ready audience. And that is the subject of our next video on the Peace of Nicias.